Hello, friends. Have you ever wondered how the Russia Ukraine conflict started? It's a complex issue that's been making headlines for years now. But to truly understand it, we must dive deep into the past. Today, we will explore the historical, political, and the social factors that led to this war. So, grab a cup of coffee and unravel this intricate wave of events together. Let's start with a quick geography lesson. Ukraine is the second largest country in the Europe, bordering Russia to the east. Its strategic location has made it a key player in European politics for centuries. Now, let's travel back in a time to understand the root of this conflict. The story began with the formation of Kievan Rus in the 9th century. This medieval state is considered the cultural ancestor of modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and the Belarus. Fast forward to 17th century, and we see Ukraine coming under the Russian imperial control. This period marked the beginning of Russia's long-standing influence over Ukrainian affairs. The 20th century brought significant changes in the region. After the Russia's revolution in 1917, Ukraine briefly declared independence. However, it was soon incorporated into the Soviet Union in 1922. During the Soviet era, Ukraine experienced both development and hardship. The 1930s saw a man-made famine known as the Holodomor, which killed millions of Ukrainians. This tragedy is still a point of contention between Russia and Ukraine today. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a turning point. Ukraine finally gained its independence.
Was the culmination of months of students and activists. The Soviet Union was soon dissolved on December 25th.
But the transition was not smooth. The country struggled with the economic challenges and the political instability. Now, let's talk about the key events that shaped modern Ukrainian politics. The Orange Revolution in 2004. This was a series of protests against election fraud, showing Ukraine's desire for true democracy. But the real catalyst for today's conflict came in 2014 with the Euromaidan Revolution. Protests erupted when then-President Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign an associate agreement with the European Union. This decision was seen as a move towards closer ties with Russia. Against the wishes of many Ukrainians, the protest led to Yanukovych's ousting, which didn't sit well with the Russia. In response, Russia annexed Crimea, a peninsula in southern Ukraine, in March 2014. This move was widely condemned by the international community. Following the annexation of Crimea, conflict broke out in eastern Ukraine. Pro-Russian separatists in the Donetsk and the Luhansk region declared independence from the Ukraine. This led to prolonged conflict known as the War in Donbas region. Despite attempts at a peace talk and ceasefire, tension continued to simmer. Fast forward to February 2022, and we see Russia launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This escalation shocked the world and brought the conflict in the forefront of global attention. So, what are the key factors that led to this war? First, there are the historical and the cultural ties between Russia and the Ukraine. Many Russians, including President Vladimir Putin, view Ukraine as an integral part of the Russian heritage. Second, There is the geopolitical aspect. Ukraine's potential alignment with the West, particularly NATO, is seen as a threat by Russia. Putin has long opposed NATO's eastward expansion, viewing as an encroachment on Russia's sphere of influence. Third, we have the issue of national identity. While many Ukrainians assert their distinct culture and their national identity, some Russians view Ukrainians as a part of broader Russian nation. Fourth, there is an economic factor. Ukraine's rich agriculture and the industrial region make it a valuable economic asset. Lastly, we can't ignore the role of domestic politics in the both countries. In Russia, the conflict has been used to rally nationalist sentiment. In Ukraine, it has strengthened pro-Western attitude and national unity. It's important to note that this conflict has had far-reaching consequences. It has led to humanitarian crisis with the thousands of lives lost and the millions displaced. The war has also had global economic impact, affecting energy prices and the food security. The international community has responded with the sanctions against Russia and support for Ukraine. However, finding a peaceful resolution to the conflict remains a significant challenge. Now, let's understand the role of NATO plays in a global conflict. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is a NATO? NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a military alliance formed after World War II in 1949. The original goal was to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. Today, NATO has 30 member countries, mostly from North America and Europe. Now, why is NATO important in today's world? Well, it's the world's most powerful military alliance. NATO operates on the principle of collective defense. This means an attack against one member is considered an attack against all. It's like having a group of friends who always have your back. Let's talk about NATO's involvement in a recent conflict. One of the most significant has been in the Eastern Europe. NATO has been supporting Ukraine, though Ukraine is not a NATO member. This support includes military training, equipments, and the intelligence sharing. It's a delicate balance as NATO tries to help without directly engaging in the conflict. But NATO's role is not just about military action. It also serves as a political alliance and the forum for discussion. Member countries meet regularly to discuss security issues. They work together to find diplomatic solutions to global problems. This political aspect is just as important as the military side. Now, let's look at some specific way NATO has been involved. NATO countries have imposed economic sanctions on Russia. They have also increased their military presence in Eastern Europe. This is to deter further aggression and show support for NATO members in the region. It's a strategy of containment and the deterrence. But NATO actions have faced criticism too. Some argue that NATO's expansion eastward has contributed to the tension with Russia. Others say NATO should do more to support Ukraine. There is an ongoing debate about the right balance of the involvement. It's a complex issue with valid arguments on different sides. Let's talk about the role of individual NATO countries. The United States, as the largest NATO member, play a leading role. But European countries like France, Germany, and the UK are also key players. Each country contributes troops, equipments, and the funding to NATO operation. The alliance strength comes from these combined efforts. NATO also works closely with non-member countries. They have partnership with countries like Australia, Japan, and the South Korea. This partnership helps extend NATO's influence globally. It's a part of NATO's strategy to address security challenges beyond Europe. This global approach reflects the challenging nature of international security. Let's consider the future of NATO. The alliance is adapting to the new type of threats. Cyber warfare and terrorism are now major concern. NATO is developing capabilities to address these modern challenges. It is an evolution from its original Cold War focus. But NATO faces internal challenges too. There are debates about defense spending amongst member countries. Some country members don't meet the agreed target of 2% of their GDP spending. This has led to tension within the alliance. It raises questions about burden sharing and the commitments. Looking at the bigger picture, NATO's role is evolving. It's not just about military power anymore. NATO is increasing involvement in a humanitarian mission. It's also focusing on issues like climate change and its security implications. This broader approach reflects the complex nature of global security today. Now, let's talk about NATO's decision-making process. All decisions are made by consensus. This means all 30 members must agree on any action. It can make decision-making slow, but it ensures all voices are getting heard. This process is crucial for maintaining unity in the alliance. Now, let's consider some specific NATO operations. The alliance has been involved in a peacemaking mission in the Balkans. It led operations in Libya in 2011. NATO has also been active in Afghanistan for many years. These missions shows the diverse range of NATO's activity. But NATO's actions are not without controversy. Some argue that NATO operations have sometimes made the situation worse. There are debates about the legality and the effectiveness of some interventions. These criticisms highlighted the challenges of the international military actions. It's important to consider both the success and the failures of the NATO operations. Looking at the current event, NATO's role is more prominent than ever. The alliance is working to support Ukraine without directly military involvement. This includes providing intelligence, equipment, and the training. NATO is also reinforcing its presence in Eastern Europe. It's a delicate balance between support and the avoiding escalation. Let's consider the economic aspect of the NATO influence. NATO countries represent a significant portion of the global economy. This economic power translates into the political and the military influence. Economic sanctions coordinated by NATO members can have a major impact. It shows how NATO influence extends beyond just military matters. Now, let's understand economic sanctions on Russia. First, let's break down what economic sanctions actually are. Think of them as the financial penalties countries use to influence another nation's behavior. In Russia's case, these sanctions were imposed following its action in the Ukraine. Now, you might be wondering, what do these sanctions look like in the practice? Well, they come in a various forms, from freezing assets to trade restrictions. For instance, many Russian banks are cut off from SWIFT, the global messaging system for financial transactions. This move essentially isolates these banks from the international financial system. Imagine suddenly not being able to use your credit card or transfer money abroad. That's the kind of impact we are talking about. But the sanctions don't stop there. Many Western companies have pulled out of Russia, closing stores and halting operations. This has led to job losses and reduced consumer options for Russian citizens. It's like waking up one day to find out your favorite store and a restaurant have all closed down. Now, let's look at how these sanctions have affected Russia's economy. The Russian ruble initially plummeted, losing almost half of its value against the dollar. This made import much more expensive for Russians, leading to inflation and the reduced purchasing power. However, it's important to note that the ruble has since stabilized, partially due to the Russia's countermeasures. Speaking of countermeasures, Russia has not just sat back and accepted these sanctions. They have implemented their own economic strategies to mitigate the impact. For example, they have increased trade with countries like China and India. They have also demanded that unfriendly countries pay for Russian gas in the ruble. This move was designed to support the ruble and the maintained demand for the currency. But here is where it gets really interesting. These sanctions are not just affecting Russia, they are sending shockwaves through the global economy. Let's start with the energy prices. Russia is the major oil and the gas exporter, and sanctions has disrupted these supplies. As a result, we have seen energy prices soar worldwide. If you have noticed higher prices at the gas pump or on your heating bill, this is partially why. The sanctions have also impacted global food security. Russia and Ukraine together accounts for about 30% of global wheat export. With the conflict and the sanctions disrupting this export, have seen food prices rise globally. This is particularly concerning for countries that heavily rely on these imports. Now, let's zoom in on some specific sectors affected by the sanctions. The automotive industry, for instance, has taken a hit. Many car manufacturers rely on parts from Russia, particularly palladium for catalytic converters. With the sanctions in place, they have had to scramble to find alternative suppliers. This has led to production delay and increased cost, which often get passed on to the consumers. The tech sectors has not been spared either. Russia was a significant exporter of noble gases used in semiconductor manufacturing. With this supply disrupted, is added to the ongoing global chip shortages. This affects everything from a smartphone to the car to the household appliances. Let's not forget about the financial sector. Western banks with the exposure to Russia have faced losses. Some have had to write off billions of assets. This can lead to tighter lending practices, potentially slowing economic growth. Now, you might be wondering, are these sanctions effective? Well, that's a complex question without a simple answer. On one hand, they have certainly put pressure on Russia's economy. The IMF projects Russia's GDP to contract significantly. However, Russia has shown resilience, finding a way to adapt and work around some sanctions. It's also worth noting that sanctions can have unintended consequences. For example, they have accelerated efforts by some countries to reduce their reliance on the US dollar. This could have long-term implications for the global financial system. These sanctions have reshaped a global trade flow and economic alliances. We have seen a shift towards a more fragmented global economy. Countries are reassessing their economic dependencies and diversifying their trade relationships. This could lead to significant changes in the global economic landscape in the years to come. Now, let's discuss the humanitarian crisis and refugee situation in Ukraine. The crisis in Ukraine began in 2014 and they escalated dramatically in 2022. Conflict in the region has forced millions to flee their homes, seeking safety in neighboring countries like Poland, Romania, and Moldova. They have received a largest number of refugees. But what exactly does it mean to be a refugee? Refugees are individuals who have been forced to leave their country due to war, violence, or persecution. They often arrive in the new countries with little more than a cloth on their back. The scale of this crisis is staggering. As of now, over 5 million Ukrainians have fled the country. Another 7 million are internally displaced within the Ukraine itself. These numbers represent real people, each with their own story of the loss and the survival. Let's take a moment to consider the human impact on the crisis. Families torn apart, children missing schools, and elderly individuals struggling to adapt new surroundings. Many refugees face language barriers, making it difficult to find work or access services. Trauma and mental health issues are common amongst those who have fled conflict zones. Now, let's look at the challenges faced by host countries. Providing shelters, food, and healthcare for millions of people is no small task. Many countries have set up reception centers and temporary housing. However, the sheer number of refugees has strained resources and the infrastructure. International organizations play a crucial role in addressing this crisis. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee-led organization efforts. They work alongside with the UN agencies, NGOs, and local governance bodies. These organizations provide essential services, food and clean water distribution, emergency shelter, healthcare and the vaccination programs, education support for displaced children, psychological counseling for trauma survivors. Despite these efforts, significant challenges remain. Long-term housing solutions are needed as the crisis continues. Integration into host communities is an ongoing process. Many refugees hope to return home one day, but the path to peace remains uncertain. It's important to remember that refugees bring valuable skills and experiences to their host countries. Many are professionals like doctors, teachers, and engineers. With the proper support, they can contribute significantly to their new community. Let's look at some positive examples of refugee integration. Language classes, helping adults to find employment. Children excelling in local schools. Community events, fostering culture exchange. Refugee-led businesses contributing to the local economy. Now, let's talk about cyber warfare. Cyber warfare involves action by a nation state to penetrate another nation's computer or networks. The goal? To cause damage, disruption, or gather intelligence. Now, let's look at some real-world example. Remember the 2007 cyber attack on Estonia? It crippled the country's infrastructure for a week. Or the Stuxnet worm that targeted Iran's nuclear facility in 2010. These events show the power of cyber warfare. But cyber warfare is not just about attack on infrastructure. It's also about information warfare. Information warfare uses data to gain an advantage over an opponent. This can include spreading misinformation or manipulating public opinion. Let's break down the main component of cyber warfare. First, denial of service. This overwhelms system, causing them to crash. Second, malware, like viruses, worms, and trojans, designed to damage or infiltrate system. 3. Phishing, tricking people into the revealing sensitive information. We have state-sponsored hackers, often working for intelligence agencies. There are also independent hacker groups, sometimes hired by governments. And don't forget cyber criminals, who may exploit conflict for personal gain. The targets of cyber warfare are diverse. Military systems are obvious targets, but Civilian infrastructure like power grids and the water supplies are also affected. Financial systems and the communication networks are frequently attacked too. Now, let's shift gear to information warfare. Information warfare is all about controlling the narrative. It uses various techniques to influence public opinion and the decision making. These include disinformation, deliberately spreading false information. 2. Propaganda, using biased or misleading information to promote a cause. 3. Social media manipulation, using bots and fake accounts to amplify messages. 4. Deep fakes, creating realistic but fake video to mislead people. Let's look at a case study. The 2016 US presidential election reported a foreign interference through a cyber attack and disinformation campaigns. This shows how cyber and the information warfare can impact democratic processes. What can individuals do to protect themselves? First, keep your software and the system updated. Second, use a strong, unique password for each account. 3. Be critical of information you see online, especially during conflicts. 4. Learn to recognize phishing attempts and social engineering tactics. Remember, in a cyber and the information warfare, everyone is potentially on the front lines. Your personal device could be used in a larger attack without your knowledge. Now, let's look at Russia's military approach. Russia has traditionally relied on overwhelming forces and numbers. They have a large arsenals of tanks, artillery, and aircraft at their disposal. Their strategy often involves creating a shock and wave effect to demoralize the enemy. However, this approach has faced challenges in the Ukrainian conflict. Russian forces have struggled with the logistic and the supply chain issue. Many of their vehicles and the equipments have broken down or run out of the fuel. This has slowed their advance and made them weak to Ukrainian counterattack. Russia has also employed the use of missile strike on key infrastructure. These attacks aim to disrupt Ukrainian commands and control system, but they have also led to civilian casualties, drawing international condemnations. Now, let's turn our attention to Ukraine's military strategy. Ukraine has adopted a more flexible and adaptive approach. They have focused on mobility and hit and run tactics to counter Russia's superior numbers. Ukrainian forces have made effective use of anti-tank weapons like the Javelin missile. These weapons have proven deadly against Russia's armed vehicles. Ukraine has also made innovative use of drones for reconnaissance and attacks. These unmanned aerial vehicles have proved valuable intelligence and the strike capacities. Ukraine has also made innovative use of drones for reconnaissance and attacks. These unmanned aerial vehicles have proved valuable intelligence and the strike capabilities. Let's compare two sides of air power capabilities. Russia has a larger and the more advanced air force on paper. However, they have been unable to achieve air superiority over Ukraine. Ukrainian air defense have proven surprisingly resilient. They have managed to shoot down numerous Russian aircraft and cruise missiles. This has forced Russian pilots to fly at a lower altitude, making them more weak. These attacks have targeted military systems, infrastructure, and even civilians' network. Training and the morals have played a significant role in the performance of both armies. Russian forces have shown signs to low morale and poor training in some instances. Ukrainian troops fighting to defend their homeland have displayed high motivation. The conflict has also highlighted the importance of international support. Ukraine has received significant military aid from the Western allies. Let's discuss the use of decoy and the deception in this conflict. Both sides have employed dummy equipment to confuse enemies' intelligence. Now, let's break down how this war has affected oil markets. First, we saw a sharp increase in oil prices. Why? Because there was a fear of supply shortage. Russia exports millions of barrels of oil daily. With the sanction in place, this supply was threatened. Countries and the companies started looking for alternative sources. This led to increased demand for other oil-producing nations. The places like Saudi Arabia and United States saw a pressure to increase production. But it's not just about finding new sources. Transportation routes have also been affected. Many oil tankers had to change their usual path. This resulted in longer shipping times and the higher cost. Now, let's talk about how everyday people are feeling this. Higher gas prices at the pump are the most visible effect. Some countries have seen record high fuel cost. This impact not just drivers but also industries relying on transportations. Moving on to the natural gas, the situation gets even more complex. Europe, in particularly, has felt the squeeze. Many European countries relied heavily on Russian natural gas. With the war, the supply became uncertain. Countries scrambled to find new sources of natural gas. We saw increased interest in the liquefied natural gas, that's LNG, from the US and the Qatar. But switching to new suppliers isn't a quick or easy process. It requires a new infrastructure and the long-term contracts. The war has also accelerated the push for renewable energy. Many countries see this as a way to reduce dependency on fossil fuel. Investment in solar, wind, and other green technologies have increased, but the transition takes time and the fossil fuel still dominate the energy mix. Let's look at some specific example of how countries have adapted. Germany, for instance, restarted some coal plants. This was to reduce reliance on Russian gas. Despite environmental concerns, the US became the major LNG exporter to Europe, changing a global trade partners. The war has also highlighted the importance of energy storage. Countries are investing more in a strategic reserve. This is to buffer against future supply stocks. We are seeking changes in the energy policies worldwide. Many governments are reassessing their energy security strategies. There is a new focus on diversifying energy sources and the suppliers. The conflict has also impacted global climate goals. On one hand, it's pushing some countries towards cleaner energy. On other, the immediate need for energy security has led to increased use of coal in some places. Let's talk about the winners and the losers in this new energy landscape. Countries with the abundant oil and the gas reserve outside the conflict zone have benefited. They have seen increased demand and the higher prices for new resources. On the flip side, energy importing countries have faced higher costs and the supply challenges. The war has also affected energy companies. Some have had to write off investment in Russia's project. Others have seen opportunities in new markets and increased demand. Looking ahead, what we can expect? The energy market likely to remain volatile for some time. We might see continued high prices and the supply uncertainties. Let's not forget about the environmental angle. The conflict has disrupted global efforts to combat climate changes. Some countries have a temporarily increased coal use due to energy shortage. However, It's also accelerated the transition to renewable energy in others. The conflict has also affected global cooperation on other issues. We have seen the reduced collaboration on matters like pandemic preparedness and space explorations. This highlights how geopolitical tension can hinder progress on shared global challenges. Looking ahead, what we can expect? Expert predicts a more fragmented world order. We might see the formation of new alliances and economic blocs. The role of international institutes may continue to evolve. Countries may focus more on self-reliance and regional partnership. As we have seen, the impact of this conflict on global geopolitics is far-reaching and complex. Is reshaping alliances, economic relationship, and very structure of international relations. Understanding these changes is crucial for making sense of the world we live in. What do you think about these geopolitical shifts? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more insightful content on global affairs. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.